The Elder Dragons are some of the most iconic and revered monsters throughout the entire Monster Hunter franchise, and for good reason. They are one of the widest classifications, with some of the single strongest entities in the entire narrative belonging to it. The category includes everything from storm-conductive unicorns, steel dragons of wind, cephalopods of life and death respectively, whales of sea and sand, and massive flightless behemoths of the ground. They have some of the most mystifying and complex set of abilities, with scholars in the universe still trying to plunder the depths of their mysteries. And they are quite frequently some of the hardest, most well-designed fights in their respective games. Honestly, no matter your taste, there's an Elder Dragon that will cater specifically to you, and for many, their sheer depth is an outstanding quality. Yet, in the wake of the 5th gen, I have heard some rumblings from within a sect of the Monster Hunter community, one that has voiced displeasure with the way Elder Dragons have been handled in the franchise, especially as of late. There is a sense that some of the magic in these beasts have been lost, that they aren't the same titans of legend that they once were, reduced to the garbage of mundanity, a breed all too common for something of their status, even so far as being actively disrespected, some say. At first, I was content to just leave the opinions be and move on with my day, but the more I saw it, and after reading a particular thread, the discussion stuck out too much in my mind to ignore. So here we are. In this video, I hope to illustrate some of the common points I've seen in online discussion, the trends in recent games, the evolution of the franchise, the various ideologies, and more importantly, if there is actually a problem with the classification that needs to be fixed. All of course, from my perspective, seeing what I can weigh into the conversation. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get started. To properly illustrate the perspectives going forward, and to ensure that people automatically don't go straight to assumptions, we're going to have to set down some facts and numbers. First, let's divide up the Elder Dragons by the generation they debuted in. Starting with Generation 1, we were introduced to Kirin, Lao Shanlun, Ashen Lao Shanlun, Fatalis, and Crimson Fatalis, giving us 5 Elder Dragons in total. A solid number, honestly, for the start of the franchise, so let's see where it goes from here. Going into Generation 2, we got introduced to what is considered by many the go-to Elder Dragon trio of Chameleos, Kushala, and Teostra, who form the basis of a rock-paper-scissors system of strengths and weaknesses. Along with that, we also have Lunastra, the rusted variation of Kushala, Yamasukami, and the final member of the Fatalis trio with White, or in some translations, Old Fatalis. That makes up 7 Elder Dragons that were introduced in this generation, bringing the total up to 12. We're entering the double digits now, but it's still pretty self-contained, I'd say. Now, let's keep it going into the 3rd generation. Generation 3 brought us the regular and Goldbeard versions of Cedeus, both versions of Gen Moran, Amatsu, Elatrion, and Dire Morales. 7 must be a magic number, because this is the 2nd time in a row we've had 7 new Elder Dragons introduced, bumping up the total now to 19. The category seems to be expanding quite a bit, but we ain't anywhere close to being finished. Generation 4 gave us the 3rd sibling to the Moran family with Daren, the Arctic Orochi subspecies to Kirin, the evolved form of Gormagala, the Shagaru Magala, both versions of Dalmadur, Gogmazios, Nikarchos, and finally, the flagship of Generation's ultimate, Valstrax. This gives us 8 new Elders introduced in the generation, entering the total into the high 20s at 27. Oh, Oh, but if you think it is packed now, you haven't seen anything yet! Generation 5 is the biggest jump yet, bringing in so many new elders that I can't mention all of them in a comfortable amount of time. But just to give an idea, 3 of the flagships we got this generation were elders. Every final boss was an elder, with 3 serpents and 2 Jivas. There was every single Risen, variants like Ruiner, Black Veil, and Primordial, and then there's Behemoth. Yeah, you probably forgot about him, huh? Well, unlike Leshen and Ancient Leshen, who have their own category, Behemoth is included in the Elder Dragons. Suffice to say, this generation is packed, bringing us a whopping 24 Elders. That's almost every single Elder Dragon in the main line, from the first game all the way to Gen U, also raising the total Elder Dragon count to the final mainline tally as the writing of this video to 51 Elders. And I think it is right here where the discussion truly kicks in. Though some people may have argued in the past that the Elder Dragons were too packed going into the 3rd and 4th generation, something that I can neither prove nor disprove, I'd like to say the fact that I'm hearing this idea more and more frequently shows that before now, it was bearable. It was approaching the 30s for sure, but every generation so far had kept the inclusion count to a respectable halfway point between 5 and 10. The jump in 5th gen, however, can be described as nothing other than an explosion, giving us 3 times the Elders as the previous largest jump being the 4th generation's 8 Elders. And this isn't even counting all of the other spin-off media and their own Elders, which, for curiosity's sake, I decided to add up as well, an action that inflated the total all the way to 82 Elders. With the spin-off increase or not, however, this count still makes the Elder Dragon classification one of the biggest categories in all of Monster Hunter, only being contested by the Flying Wyvern's gargantuan 50, even then being beaten out by 1 point. It's this oversaturation that I think is the big deal breaker for a lot of people, as many take issue with the fact that despite being rare forces of nature or legends personified, they appear to be as common as the typical bird wyvern or flying wyvern, which are like the 2 most basic and common species in and out of the universe. It's the suspension of disbelief being broken, the fairy tale becoming commonplace, that makes others draw a lot of comparisons to Pokemon. Pokemon 2 has been having discussions among the community over the mundanity of the legendaries, with there now being a legendary for almost every aspect of the world. Hell, when Gen 4 came out with the introduction of the Creation Trio and Arceus, lots of people asked where else the series would even go now that we had the equivalent of God and Satan as Pokemon. I've already discussed this before in my 5 wishes for the next Monster Gamer Generation video, but I do agree in the idea of other classifications gain a better shake on things. Because as it stands, the inequality with categories as unfairly represented as the Snake Wyverns and Carapaceons compared to the well-stuffed Elder Dragons is absurd. Going forward, I do think a slowing down on the increase in Elders, much less the amount included, would greatly help, setting back a little bit of the bloat created by the 5th generation. But numbers aren't the only reason for this Elder Dragon debate. Let's talk about another reason why they might have become oversaturated for some people. Elder Dragons are the natural conclusion for the flow of Monster Hunter. You start out every game as a weak little baby hunter who spends their time doing fetch quests, with the occasional slaying of small monsters as you get accustomed to the game's feel. Eventually, you will be tasked with your first big monster, usually some kind of raptor or bird wyvern. This kind of fight teaches you how the larger monsters work, as well as mechanics like enrage, the importance of tracking, part breaks, and the usefulness of items or traps. From that point onwards, you work your way through harder monsters, making stronger gear to deal with the tasks ahead, in addition to learning about other important elements like elemental attacks and resistance, blights, wind pressure, roars, and more. Elder Dragons, therefore, represents the pinnacle of your hunting career, the exams, so to speak. They generally have stronger, wide-ranging attacks, greater elemental capability, and often include mechanics in their fight, like an aura or multiple phases that must be dealt with to win. They are, without exception, the endgame challenges in every Monster Hunter game. Now, there are of course games where there is something else to do alongside Elders, for you Apexes, Generations and Generation Ultimates, Hypers and Deviants, Worlds Tempered and Arc Tempered, all that and more. But they are still always included at the very least as the gateway into the endgame. And even with some of the systems I just mentioned, you will still be encouraged to fight Elder Dragons. World's Tempered system and endgame was infamous for a lot of people for being Elder Dragon Simulator featuring Elder's Recess and Knuckles due to how they were the best tempered monsters to go for decorations and streamstones with their 3-star rating. Even more so when Arc Tempereds got added in, being an Elder Dragon exclusive class that incentivized hunting them because of their gamma armors. Sunbreak also has the same idea with the Risens and their exclusive gear, materials, and decorations that come with fighting them, especially in the Anomaly system. All of this is added on top of the fact that many of the DLC monsters added into these games are Elder Dragons. This might be another reason why there's exhaustion surrounding the Elder Dragons for some, as it has become expected to face off against them in the endgame, with one as the entry point or final boss of the game since that is extremely common. Again, just like with the legendary Pokemon. Contrary to the previous points, I don't really think this is a situation that can be avoided in all honesty. As I already mentioned, it is not just the expectation, but the standard for Elder Dragons to be part of the endgame, because it makes a natural conclusion for a player's growth as a hunter. To remove the Elder Dragons from that equation would be removing the final step to the progression curve. So I see it extremely unlikely for the Elder Dragons to be removed outright from any game. They are just too important and have been like this since the very start. I can only see a change happening through two different methods. 1. Make the endgame consist of Elder level threat or Apex tier monsters alongside whatever the endgame system is. Or 2. Make the Elder Dragons be hidden encounters the player has to unlock by completing certain conditions in the game. Option 1 is something that has already been done by the franchise in a certain regard, as endgame after all is where you start running into things like rare species and variants alongside Elders. So having them be the endgame in a game where Elders are gone could be possible. On the flip side, this could be too massive of a change for the franchise, and exaggerate a problem some people have with Elder level monsters. That being how they bring down the Elder Dragons to a less unrivaled position within the world, and how, just like with Elder Dragons somewhat, there starts to be more and more of them when in universe they're supposed to be extremely rare. Option 2 is the choice I feel that is the best compromise, as the Elders still get to be a part of the progression flow, but require players to go out of their way to hunt and gather up resources to even unlock them. And it isn't like this is a foreign concept. The first 2 generations, after all, had this as a standard practice, even with non-Elder monsters like Kezu. The problem that could then come into play with this, however, would be some players thinking this is an unnecessary change that overcomplicates things, while simultaneously being pointless in the sense of a mystery, as in the age we live in, information spreads like wildfire. This is the exact reason why Capcom had begun to shed more light on the first-class monsters during the 15th anniversary. The same strategies of information keeping to create a sense of mystery and community among the players just doesn't work nowadays with how online everything is. Elders being an unlockable mystery might last for a few moments, but it wouldn't take long before the mystery gets solved, the solution gets posted, and now everyone knows it, so the Elder Dragon might as well have already been unlocked from the get-go. That isn't to say that secrets can't be done. Of course it can. Just that it won't have the same effects as it once did. One other small complaint on the gameplay side of things that I've seen from a few people about the Elder Dragons is that in addition to their frequency, they often don't feel like big events. Many could argue that for monsters as powerful as these, even the weaker ones, they should require lots of time, and perhaps even multiple quests in order to take down. And I really don't agree with this. Once again, yes, this was something that happened back in the first and second generation. The Fatali were all infamous examples that took multiple quests to take down due to their gargantuan health pool. Upwards of 4 quests, perhaps even 7. But this isn't the same time and community as it was back in the first and second generation. This is the 5th and soon to be 6th in a year. The novelty of a long, gauntlet-based Elder Dragon might be fun for the first time around, but eventually there is the extremely likely chance that it will get boring if the only purpose of these other quests is prolonging the fight artificially rather than changing the fight as you progress. If all you're doing is fighting the same fucking Fatalis, Lao Shan Lun, or Teostra for 4 quests straight with no changes, then that ain't fun. Of course, even with changes, that doesn't guarantee success. I can't vouch for Violent and especially Berserk Raviente, but Base Raviente was a quest that, while made sense to be a gauntlet and changed up throughout, still had a lot of fluff that bogged down the fight. You were up close whacking a giant immobile serpent on 3 separate islands 3 times each, needing to go back home every time, post the next part, and get enough people in just to go again. A process which lasted all of an hour for me and my group. Doesn't make sense considering his size. Yes. Is it unique? Oh, certainly. But uniqueness doesn't make up for repetitious game design and bad execution. I think how the Elder Dragons are handled nowadays in length and events are just about perfect, give or take a few details. The standard and arena-based Elders don't take too long to take down, but will still offer up a challenge if you aren't careful. Plus, arena Elders often have multiple phases to the fight, combined with being a bigger singular target that has much more spectacle. Meanwhile, the Kulve and Safi sieges show the natural progression of the multiple quest format, banding together multiple squads across the hub to take it down. With some more tweaks to the system in regards to things like RNG, and I think it could be pretty darn close to perfection. Not everything needs to be a dramatic multiple quest siege, otherwise that would be boring. But it isn't just the gameplay that's been changed over the course of the franchise, because we also have to consider the franchise's evolution and narrative. The evolution and increase in the Elder Dragons offers an interesting parallel to the narrative in the world of Monster Hunter, and thereby the franchise's evolution as a whole. Starting all the way back in the simpler days, there really wasn't a whole lot to the world. The games had a small but tight starting roster of monsters. The world felt slightly more primitive and ancient, having a rural or rustic feel with a village like Kokoto. And a huge part of the overarching narrative was about humble beginnings, starting from nothing and creating a legacy that others would look to in the future. Kokoto is regarded in the world as the birthplace of hunting, with the chief establishing the codes and customs that a hunter partakes in when engaging in a hunt. It is a time of superstition and myth. Let me remind everyone once again that the final boss of the village wasn't some disastrous Elder Dragon, but a Monoblos. Still a danger in its own right, but nowhere near the level of Geismagorm. Yet, it was with the slaying of a Monoblos that the Kokoto chief cemented the Monoblos as a rite of passage. And just like he did all those years ago when hunting was first finding its feet, when the guild was first established, here you are following in his footsteps as the first fleet of hunters the world would know. And in that regard, the Elder Dragons and especially Fatalis culminates this hero's journey. Monsters without peers, challenging you to surpass the first legends of the Monster Hunter world, not knowing anything about these creatures or what they do. They were massive events, taking multiple quests to finally bring to their knees, and requiring the most out of you and your party to even unlock. As time passed and the games continued, we saw more of the world. We saw other villages, cultures, bustling ports, and guild outposts. We witnessed new technologies and innovation burst onto the scene, not just with weapons, but armor design too, tools and siege equipment as well. We documented more monsters and species emerging from the woodworks, with all new hunting grounds to explore. And most importantly, we saw hurricanes, flame, miasma, and floods made manifest. Forces of nature and mythological deities appear before our very eyes, gracing a more enlightened world with simultaneous mystery and knowledge. As their increase wouldn't just allow for new breakthroughs in research, but also in the ecological chain of command. We weren't the only things that could quell a storm. There were others that could stand up to it, harm it even. Now it is through these new challenges, as well as the knowledge the world has gained over the generations, that we succeed of the old generations of hunters as legends in our own right. The savior of Moga, the guardian of Dundorma, the unparalleled hunter of Berna, the sapphire star of the New World, and the bright flame of hope for Kimura and Elgato. While it might be all too easy to dismiss the increasing numbers of Elder Dragons as lazy, and the existence of Elder-level monsters as a factor that trivializes the strength of Elders, it would be ignorant to do so, as that dismisses the greater narrative and universe of Monster Hunter. More than just the no duh of there being more when a series keeps going, it would make sense for the world to be more defined as our knowledge grows. The series, after all, has always had an ecological basis for everything within it, doing its best to offer immersive, rational explanations that make sense within the world, while still providing mystery because, just like real life, despite all of our knowledge, there is still much beyond our own understanding. While a Kushala might have been a total enigma when it first appeared back in DOS, that doesn't mean that will be the same case in World and Rise. By that point in the timeline, Kushala is regarded as one of the most well-documented and frequent Elder Dragons, with its wind manipulation abilities being more properly defined in source, even if there are still a few holes in understanding how its horns can even do that. This understanding, however, isn't a complete spectrum, as monsters like Kirin are still gigantic question marks in biological comprehension. Once again, just like real life. But more than just an ecological standard, Elder Dragons have become more important to the grand scheme of the Monster Hunter storyline. Now, someone who has played way more of the older games can correct me in this regard, but if I recall correctly, they weren't really involved in the story in any way, minus Kushala since he's a flagship. At bare minimum, they might have had something to do with the Gathering Hub story slightly, but even then, that's pretty negligible in the grand scheme of things. Over time, however, Monster Hunter has tried its hands at a couple of story tropes that place a heavier emphasis on the Elder Dragon's involvement in the natural world. Whether it be the Moga Earthquake Incident, 4 and 4U's Gormagala Mystery, World's Elder Crossing, Iceborne's Old Everworm, Rise's Serpent Rampage, or Sunbreak's Curio Plague. And I think this is another big distinction to make when it comes to the Elder Dragons not seeming as powerful, grand, or mystical anymore. Because they still are. If anything, the newer games have given more to those areas than the older games ever did. It's just that we now get to see firsthand the effect Elder Dragons have upon their surroundings and the local monster populations, showcasing their terrifying power or majestic nature. Rather than taking the angle of letting their mystery do the work, making an Elder Dragon seem mighty through lack of information, later games utilize the gameplay, story, and moments within to give information that contextualizes how powerful the Elder is, or why we have to hunt one. The idea of Elder Dragons being mighty or mysterious didn't change, merely the method of communication. And while we can all say that having mysteries is a good practice for creating a sense of the unknown, let's not pretend that it is a perfect methodology, because that mystery gives way to a lot of misinformation that clouds what is canon, or what is just made up bullshit, such as the circumstance of the Fatalis trio for a huge part of the franchise. And given how huge, especially nowadays, the franchise is, communication of its world and scale is crucial for old and new players alike. With all these points covered, I think now is a good time to give my final thoughts on the subject and what it all means. Overall, I think if there's any solid takeaway from this video to have, it would be the blinding power of attachment and interpretation. Interpretation is one of the core strengths of humanity, being able to see symbology, representation, and meaning in places where you wouldn't think it exists. Through interpretation, we realize the world around us and frame it in a picture that makes sense to us. Everyone's interpretation is different, and for some, the interpretation created in their minds about the Elder Dragons in the early generations is one of a kind. But that's also what makes this topic so difficult to analyze, as it isn't just purely black and white like many people would have you believe. There is nothing that definitively states Elder Dragons have for sure gotten worse, or made less impactful in the later games, because it doesn't exist. Trying to make that point is a fruitless endeavor that ultimately comes down to cherry-picking specific evidence that fits your criteria, while ignoring anything that might oppose it. You could say all you want that there is definitive proof via numbers and the increase in 5th gen, but that does nothing to account for the actual quality, the fights, the designs, the story, the popularity, all of that and more that still make the Elder Dragons so iconic. If you have your view of the franchise, of the Elders or the older games, and miss what it might have felt to you, that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying you are wrong for feeling that. It is your experience at the end of the day, and all the more power to you for enjoying it. At the same time though, it is important to realize that things change or grow, that your vision isn't necessarily the truth. In my honest opinion, numbers-wise, yes, the Elder Dragons need to be cut back on. There needs to be a focus on the smaller, more underutilized classifications that deserve to be expanded upon. Symbology-wise though, and in regards to the course of the franchise, I still think the Elder Dragons as a whole feel mythologically powerful and mysterious. And as someone who puts heavy value into gameplay, I think the newer games have done a fantastic job, not just introducing all-time favorites, but also recontextualizing staples of the franchise in new, inventive ways, utilizing the technology and systems at hand to their fullest to reinvent monsters like Elatrion, Fatalis, Shigaru, Valstrax, and Amatsu in new, exciting ways. Nothing about them has changed for me, and I'm really curious to see what Wilds will do with its Elder Dragons. What kind of powers, body types, and even mythological or cultural basis will we see? Ultimately though, this is all dependent on your experience with the franchise, which is why I want to ask the question. What do you all think? Is there a definitive problem with the Elder Dragons that needs to be changed? Even if not definitive, does something about their recent interpretations feel off to you? Or have the Elder Dragons been doing even better? Have you got some new all-time favorites? Let me know all of this down in the comment section below. And as always, I have been the Monarch of Dragons, and I hope you all have a fantastic day / night wherever you live. Peace and Kulus Volts.